Well, yeah, as much as I would like to think myself special, that he was giving me special attention, the fact is that everyone in the arts community knew him. Every single person.
When I think of Jerome, I think of his smile more than anything. I mean, he was such a happy and sharing person. He knew so much about African American art because he was a real student. And he was probably the first real student of African American art who I had a relationship with.
I was one of the few people who actually went into his home, and I'm telling you, it was thick. And I remember we had to kind of turn sideways to get down some areas. Oh my gosh! And I was like a kid in a candy store because you could slip go this way and then this Richard Dempsey. I mean, this beautiful painting pop out over here, or you'll see an album or something over here that you just don't expect.
I met Jerome in 1991 in Philadelphia um, at the October Gallery art exhibition. They used to have this huge exhibition of African American art at Temple University, McGonagall Hall.
Um, I met Jerome I opened my gallery in Eastern Market, D.C. In 1989, November of 1989. October Gallery out of Philly used to come to DC to do these art shows at the Marriott downtown. In my quest to attract customers, I had flyers printed up that I took down and I was passing them out to people exiting the October Gallery show. And I was fortunate enough to give one of those flyers to Jerome because I would pass the flyers out, run back to my gallery, and I remember distinctly him coming almost immediately, like the same, within an hour, asking me, didn't I just get this from you?
I first met Jerome probably in the mid 90s. And I was introduced to Jerome as a book dealer. And I had a friend here that owned the gallery, and I had bought some books from him. And he was telling me about the guy in DC that sold these art books. So I did. I called him up and very gregarious. We had great conversation. And Jerome's knowledge was just encyclopedic to me. So I kind of hung on everything he said. He was a character.
And he would always say, you have to read in order to know what to collect. And Jerome was the person who really introduced me to the scholarship of that experience.
He had like a portable bookcase, and he had all these books and books on top of the table. And we started talking, and then he told me what he did, and anyway, he started suggesting these different books that I should have in my collection. And he told me that I should be collecting books and that I should be reading more about African American art and black culture. So we exchanged phone numbers.
He was remarkably knowledgeable. I call him quietly brilliant because he was at the time, a Washington, D.C. police officer. And he often appeared in my gallery with his full uniform regalia and all of that. It was something he was very proud of.
And Jerome was telling me about, hey, Karen, we should do this exhibition. We should call it the three P's. And then eventually it began the four P's.
Policeman, which Jerome was, and then another P was a professor, which was James Hill, who was at Howard University. And then a third P was preacher or politician. I've heard him referred to as both, which was the Reverend Douglas Moore. And all three of those P's were in the Washington, D.C. area. And then a fourth P was Kerry Davis.
Jerome is a policeman. I'm the postman.
And he was the postman. He's in Atlanta, Georgia.
And he knew a lot of the major collectors, like in that area, like Professor Hill, who taught at Howard, was a big collector. And of course, he knew Melvin Holmes.
Jerome was one of the early people who understood the value and the power of the internet. So he really understood the auction world. And when the auction world became more electronic, he actually was on the forefront, the cutting edge of that.
And back then there wasn't a high-speed cable or modem or that. It was this dial-up thing. You probably remember the AOL, and you get all that noise, and it was slow. I think his knowledge, I call him his detective skills from becoming a police officer. He just knew where to go and how to find things.
But Jerome's background, Jerome was a police officer, detective. Then he worked at an auction house down in D.C., Westlers. So he got the end track. He's anything that was coming through, he would see it.
And I knew Jerome worked at Westlers. He told me he worked at the auction house. I said, "Oh, that was too cool. That's like cheating." Jerome could be there doing security work. He'll actually see the work come in, and he'll know ahead of time what's what.
Anything that came, people would put things on consignment. He got to meet the consignees. That's how he, and they would talk to Jerome because he was so approachable, and he just had that kind of personality. He would just draw you in, and he became friends with a lot of the consignees, and they would invite him over to it. He told me they would invite him to his house. "Oh, we got some other stuff you should come look at." And that's how he really was able to get a lot of that work.
And he was just really great, not only at learning for himself, but teaching others how to learn about art, how to learn about what's right, and how to be circumspect.
But I met so many people who were, she literally took me to Lois Jones's home and Sam Gilliam's home. He just walked it like he talked it. He was quite an incredible guy.
Jerome told me about time when Elizabeth Catlett was in D.C. and he went to see her, and he said they had the most wonderful conversation over several hours, and he just so much enjoyed it. And I guess I can say this, but he said there was one subject that she didn't want to talk about, and that was Charles White. She said when he brought up Charles White, she looked at him and told him, "We're not going to talk about it." And he did not bring it up anymore.
Jerome introduced me to Sam Gilliam. Me and my wife was in town once. He got us a studio visit. Anybody, an artist who was a friend of Jerome's was a friend of mine. Trying to think, he introduced me to the work of Charles Seabury, whose work I still love today.
Yeah, he had a good relationship with Sam Gilliam. He knew David Driscoll. He knew some of the older artists like James E. Lewis. He knew John Robertson, who was a painter down in the D.C. area.
For one, when he took me to meet Lou Stovall, who, for people who knew Lou, was incredibly prickly kind of guy. He was he didn't take kindly to just. If you were a dealer, it was very common for dealers to be, ejected from his studios. Well, who you had to have more than the money to purchase the pieces. I remember Jerome taking me to Lou's studio, which was in the back of his home, and saying, "Lou, this guy is okay, all right?" You know what I mean?
Jerome Gray had a few Alma Thomases. I know of at least 4 he had over the years. At one point, he had two in color, which is noted in the Barnett Aiden catalog that was on display at the Corcoran and Smithsonian.
Like some of the pieces that's in the auction now, like the Edward Bannister and the Carol Stockwells, he got those. Those came out of Carol Green's collection. You know, Carol Green was a writer, curator down in D.C., and then he moved down to Savannah, Georgia.
And just like there are three Daniel Freeman paintings, and Daniel Freeman was a photographer in D.C. Some people say he was the first photographer in D.C., but most people don't know about his career as a painter. But Jerome was actually able to find three paintings by Daniel Freeman. One is a painting of Frederick Douglass that was painted in 1895. The significance of the Frederick Douglass painting is that it was actually in what was the World's Fair that year, but it was basically the World's Fair for 1895. And 1895 is the year that Frederick Douglass died. So this is a painting done in 1895, the year of Frederick Douglass's death. So these three portraits, one of Frederick Douglass, one of Della Bundy, his niece, and one of John Mercer Langston, are the only known Daniel Freeman paintings that still exist. They have tremendous historical value, and they actually tell stories that only artwork of that nature and of that stature can tell.
Well, the Smithsonian Anacostia, he lent pieces to them pretty regularly because it's a community museum. It was in Southeast DC, the Anacostia. But he knew all of these curators and collectors, and I suspect that it was the result of him going out of his way to introduce himself and letting them know what he had.
Jerome was extraordinarily important in the DC community. He was a part of the DC Collectors Club, and they were just great at establishing the collection of African American art as an important endeavor. He was a real resource. He was respected by many of the major museums in the area, National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian American Museum, of course, the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum or Community Museum, which is a part of Smithsonian. I mean, they relied on Jerome extensively. But they would come seek him out as a scholar.
He just had a presence that when you even mentioning his name just brought you access and comfort. So yeah, he was well known by everybody.
So he was just a wonderful person in terms of encouraging art collecting as an intellectual pursuit.
But he helped me out tremendously early on, you know, and it got to a point where he was like, "Oh no, man, you don't need me." He was like, "You know, you're not a student anymore."
And Jerome was just so tickled about Jerome. Jerome's the biggest procrastinator probably that I ever met. I would always try to get him to finish. Or, hey, tell your story, Jerome. You need to tell your story. I'll get around to it.
I'm just happy that his collection and his work as a self-empowered curator and art historian is finally getting some light.
And I really wanted to see Jerome. I was hopeful that he could step out and be acknowledged while he was alive for what he contributed.
Yeah, yeah, we were all heartbroken when Jerome crossed over, passed away. You know, it was just one of those. It's going to happen, but when it's somebody you know personally and you care about, it was very emotional for all of us.
I really missed the guy because he was very instrumental. There's no single person more responsible for what I've been able to do. So yeah, I'm just thankful that I was fortunate enough to hand him that flyer, and that he was committed to making me a smarter art professional.